Yeah, what a huge topic, right? And I don't know that I do know that I'm not the most qualified to talk about this. When Amy brought up the subject to me, she said, yeah, you could speak at Creative Mornings, and I've been coming for a while, so I love this community. But she said that the topic is love. And I'm like, in my brain, I'm going, okay, Amy and I live in the same neighborhood, so she knows full well that I'm nearing 30 years old, I'm single, and I still live with my parents, right? So like, love, I don't know that that's like my forte. But she said, no, talk about, stories and what they mean to you. And I have to say, as she explained it to me, what I do, I sort of was like, yeah, that actually is a pretty perfect fit. So thanks, Amy. I'm really stoked to be here. And again, I think all of you are probably more qualified than I am to be standing here. So hopefully I can offer something that will be of inspiration or motivation to you in your creative life. So this is me in the 4th grade. I wasn't always single, I used to also be fat. But I wanted to show this photo because not too far after this photo was taken in the 4th grade, is when I first really fell in love with stories. A friend of mine introduced me to a book called The Hobbit. And The Hobbit, I'm sure you're all familiar with it, was my gateway book, right? That's what got me obsessed with stories, obsessed with reading, obsessed with literature. And that's an important thing because that came up later in my life, that obsession with this story particularly. And I thought this photo sort of captured my youth in that time pretty well. So that's me on the far right, dressed up as a hobbit. This is now 10 years down the road from when maybe 12 years down the road from when that last photo was taken. I had a couple years left at BYU. I was in the advertising program there. And we had a speaker come to our program. He was a recruiter from a big ad agency in San Francisco. And his message to us was, as a recruiter, what he looks for in hiring someone at his firm or at his agency, he's like, I don't want to see you guys try and recreate the best beer ads or the best Nike ads or the best Gatorade ads. He said, anyone can make good ads for big brands like that. He's like, what I expect to see from someone I hire is someone who can make big things happen on their own, right? Someone who can create something out of nothing. And me and the guy on the far left, John, we left that meeting with thick inspiration, right? We were ready to take the world by storm. We decided to forego applying for a summer internship because we said, we're going to stick around Provo and we're going to make something big happen. We didn't know what it was, but we knew it was going to be big. And then in the following days, John approached me and he said, I've got it. I figured it out. We're going to be cast as extras in the Hobbit movie that had just started production, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Little did John know, at that time in my life, I actually had written Peter Jackson a letter. They had just started producing the movies. I handwrote him a letter and basically gave my case for being cast as an extra in one of his next movies, right? I was like, I'm chubby and I had just hit puberty, so my hair started to get curly, and I was a hobbit, right? I was a living hobbit. I was short and round and just kind of had all the characteristics. And so when John approached me and said, our project, let's try and be cast as extras in the Hobbit movie, I was like, how does he know, He knows my past. But unfortunately, when I was 10 years old, I never sent that letter. I wrote it, and by the end of it, I felt stupid. I felt like, there's no way Peter Jackson wants to hear from me. He's not going to cast me in a movie. It's not going to happen, right? This was sort of my redemption moment where I was like, you know what? I'm going to make it happen. So we made costumes. We made a YouTube channel, made fake Twitter accounts, and sort of lived this fake life for several years, actually. pretty much through my college experience. We would go to school dressed like that often, and we were on the news, and all of a sudden this thing started to roll, and this project started to pick up steam to the point where we had been invited to New Zealand to come down there, and we had gained, there was like 100,000 fans, right, of this road to the Shire. That's what we called it. All these fans that were interested in what we were doing. So we go down to New Zealand, and that's when the real roller coaster began. We had a lot of different contacts that wanted to get us involved in different ways with motion capture or just being in the background of scenes and different stuff. But one by one, they sort of fell through, right? And each time it was a little more heartbreaking. And then something good would happen, and then another contact would fall through. Some other awesome stuff happened, like we were able to donate $2,000 to the New Zealand earthquake relief. So good things would happen too, but then other things would happen. I remember while I was down there, I got a phone call from a friend. My phone didn't even work in New Zealand, so I don't know how the phone call came through. But a good friend letting me know that another good friend of ours had committed suicide, right? So it's like, man, this trip was really up and down, and one of the most bizarre and emotionally taxing things I've ever done. The last day we're there, we got an email from Philippa, if you know who that is. She's kind of Peter Jackson's right-hand man, helps him write the scripts and everything. Basically emailed us and said, look guys, it's not going to happen. You're not going to be in the movie. We're sorry, but it's not going to happen. And like, ooh, man, like talk about the feeling of failure. Like we'd gone all the way to New Zealand. This was our whole, the capstone project of our college career, and it didn't happen. So flying home, we didn't really know what to do. We ended up deciding not to tell anyone. So when we get home, people are like, so we're in the movie? We're like, we can't tell you, actually. So we're trying to figure out how are we going to swing this story. We ended up trying to make a documentary out of it about what it means to try and succeed, and is success fluid, and is it always what you expect it to be? And just before we finished the documentary, our hard drive crashed and we lost everything. So again, right, the roller coaster. But I share that story because that sort of set the tone for the rest of my creative career, because it taught me to follow my dreams, right? Regardless of what happens in the end, that if you have a story you want to tell, you should go after it. After that project actually did end up landing me a good job at an advertising agency in San Francisco. So I moved to California. I bought my dream car, which is a '78 Volkswagen bus. And I thought I was living my dreams, right? I was at this big creative agency. We were doing lots of big work for Taco Bell and eBay and these big brands. But the longer I did it, the more I realized how different it was from the Road to the Shire project. I lost the ability to tell stories. I felt like I was sort of faking it, right? I was trying to convince people to buy tacos for a living, and that just didn't sit well with me. And so I quit that job, and I packed up everything I owned in this van, and drove down the coast of California. Had a brother living in Southern California who let me move in with him, because without a job, it's expensive to live in California. I guess I could have just lived in my van. I actually tried to for a little while, but that experience quitting my job led me to reevaluate what I wanted to do creatively for a living, right? And I had the novel idea to write children's books, thinking that would make me money, which it didn't. But I wrote this book. This is Hey, Follow Your Dreams. So this is my first book. You can see my bust there on the cover. But I wrote that. I spent every day for I think it was around about 90 to 100 days. I would wake up early. I'd stay up late. Really didn't sleep much at all. I put everything I had into this book. And then I sent it out to publishers, right? Because I felt like I had a story to tell. The Road to the Shire taught me that when you have a story to tell, you got to go for it, right? So I send this out to 50 to 100 different publishers. And each of them you have to craft the email just right. And you have to meet their specifications. And they have these outlines for a query letter and what they accept and what they don't accept. So you have to put a lot into each of these email pitches. Not a single one picked it up. Of all the emails I sent out, not a single person. And again, it's just like this creative hole, right? Where it's like, man, everything I try and do, it just can't seem to take off. And again, I had felt like a big failure, and I felt like, maybe the stories that I have aren't worth telling. But around about that same time, as fate would have it, I got a call from my friend Ben, who's here in the back. And Ben is now my business partner, but at the time, we were just sort of old high school buddies. And he told me about his idea for starting a publishing company. He had heard what I was up to, and he said, I see a lot of inefficiencies in the publishing industry. I think we can help more people tell more effective stories. And I was ready to go, right? I'm like, yeah, I hate the publishing industry. They rejected me. Let's change the game, right? Let's innovate in this space. And so we started a company called Dreamling Books. And we didn't really know what we were doing at all. And so we figured, well, no one knows about us, right? So let's throw like a big party so people can know about our publishing company. We'll start some book projects, but first we just need to get people to know about us. So we did an event called the Dream Athan. So this, in my creative career, this would be sort of the third chapter in this story, right? The Dream Athan, we rented out the old Granite High School in South Salt Lake. We invited a bunch of artists. We networked with all these different artists and muralists, graffiti artists, installation artists. We basically invited them in to recreate this high school and just bring it back to life and to paint on the walls and to, the whole purpose was to inspire kids to dream big, right? To follow their dreams and to tell their stories. Because we knew we wanted people to know that we were a publishing company, a storytelling company. We had to do something big to let them know. And it was amazing. I don't know if any of you were there, but it was a wild experience, a very exhausting, taxing experience, but something I never will ever regret having done. I feel like I've forged a bond with the people that we did it with that'll last a lifetime. But again, sort of nearing the end of the Dream-a-thon, the school district shut us down. They weren't happy with the extent to which we had painted on the walls. And that may have been our fault for not communicating exactly how much mural painting we wanted to do. And they threatened to sue us. They said, if you don't restore this building to its original state, we're going to sue you. And we were sort of like, well, bring it on. You can have the $20 that each of us has in our back pocket. That's about all you're going to get. But no, they basically said it's going to cost $15,000 to paint white over murals like this. We said no. We said, you're not going to bully us. And it was unfortunate that certain bridges were burned there, but we were proud of what we had done. We were proud of the story that we had told, and we had inspired a lot of people who came through the Dream-a-thon. But again, it didn't take off, right? It was this creative hole where we weren't sure that the stories that we had to tell in a creative format were worth anything to anybody. That's what we felt like was the end result of that, is that ultimately no one wanted to hear what we had to say. But we kept at it, and we said, you know what, people might not know about us as a publishing company, because I think through that people were more confused about what our company actually did. So we said, we need to publish a book, right? And so a friend of mine is a photographer in California, and his name's Chris Burkhardt. Some of you might follow him on Instagram or have seen his work, but really inspiring photographer. Chris comes to the Outdoor Retailer Show in Salt Lake twice a year, and he stays with me when he comes. And so one night he was there, and Ben and I sat down with him and said, hey, what do you think about writing a children's book? And Chris had just had his second child, and he said, I think it's amazing. I would love to do something like that and love to dedicate it to my two young boys. So that was sort of the founding principle behind The Boy Who Spoke to the Earth. We asked Chris, if you could make sure that your two kids learned one thing from you, one principle you could be positive that you know they'd learn, what would it be? And his answer was, I want them to understand this principle of finding joy in the journey, right? That it's not about, he said, as a photographer, it's not about getting to that spot and taking that photograph. It's about everything that leads up to that. The whole process of getting to that certain angle where you can take this epic photograph, that's what it's all about for me. So that's what this book's about. It's about a young boy who travels the earth and has a conversation with the earth about where to find happiness. The earth takes him to a bunch of different landscapes, but the boy just kind of keeps marching on and ignores what's all around him until the earth finally tells him, you need to stop and take it in, look around you. So the boy goes back to these landscapes and really sees what's around him. He sees nature, and he finds happiness in being present in the moment. And this book did incredibly well. The gold medal on there is actually the gold medal for Best Children's Book of the Year by an independent publisher. So finally it seemed like, wow, someone cares about the stories that we have to tell, right? And the illustrator, Dave McClellan, did an incredible job. I wish you could, the photograph of this, just the cover doesn't really do it justice, but if you ever see the illustrations, you'll know how incredible of a job Dave did. So we felt like we had some momentum as this publishing company, right? And finally I felt like, yes, everything that I've done, all these stories I've tried to tell, it's finally going somewhere. And again, at the heart of all this, Ben and I, what our purpose was is we wanted to help more people tell stories, right? These people that traditionally can't get published, how can we change that? And so we started developing a platform just on our website, Dreamling Books, where people could submit ideas for their children's book, right? Anyone could submit an idea, and the idea was that it was crowdsourced. And the best ideas would rise to the top, and then we would step in as the publisher and help that person take their book to the point where it could be sold, in Barnes & Noble and on bookshelves all over the country. And so we invested all the money that our company made from this book, we invested back into this platform, right? Because we figure if one book can do this well, imagine a bunch of books, right? We could really make a difference in the storytelling world. But it didn't happen that way. No one used the site, and that was probably our bad for not doing the proper testing and research. But and this sort of felt like the moment where it was time to give it all up, right? The site hadn't gone anywhere. We had spent all our money on it. We didn't really have money left to do anything with. And I sort of felt like our storytelling days maybe were at an end, or at least mine were, and that it was time for me to buck up and get another office job and sort of call it quits with the really creative part of my career. But Ben and I had some deep conversations about this, and we started to ask ourselves, why didn't it work, right? We're trying to help all these people get published. Why didn't this catch? And we realized that we were trying to help people tell stories for the wrong reasons. We were trying to help people tell stories so they could essentially get famous, right? So you could publish your book on a big platform and everyone would know that you wrote that book. But we really were missing the point. And this is, I think, I didn't know this at the time, but looking back, the real reason that we tell stories is for that human connection, right? So that we can understand what someone else has gone through. I've recently been, this was the Village of Lights. I forgot the slide was in here. Kind of hard to see, but that was, if some of you came, there was a massive table that sort of extended through this entire space, and we created this large, unofficial world record, I guess, of the largest Dickens village with all these little light-up Christmas houses, which was a blast, and the folks here at Connected were so supportive and so helpful, and we were able to donate the proceeds to some local charities. Tough thing with this story, I guess, was that Christmas, kind of only comes once a year, so it's not really enough to keep things going. But again, that was another story that we told. Anyway, what I was saying is we were telling stories for the wrong reasons. We were trying to promote these books on a big level. And something I found out recently is that there's a chemistry to stories. A guy by the name of Paul Zak, he's done a TED Talk. Some of you probably are familiar with his work, but he's a neurologist or he does neuroeconomics, I think is the term that he's coined. But basically why people make the decisions they make and what's happening in their brain to make those things happen. And they did some research where they brought people in and showed them a video of a father and a son. And the son in this video, it's an animated video, the son has cancer, terminal cancer, right? So the father understands that his son is dying and that he's not going to be around forever. And it sort of is about the father trying to deal with that situation. And they show this to people, and then afterwards they scan their brains, they do brain imaging to see what's happening. And what they figured out is that there's two chemicals that are released in your brain when you read or view a story. And those two chemicals, the first is cortisol. And what cortisol does, or it's related to distress, right? When you have a feeling of distress that causes you to focus on important things, that animal instinct, right? When something distresses you and you have to focus on it to know how you're going to handle that situation, the chemical in your brain is called cortisol that's causing that. And every good story has a good problem, right? So when you hit that problem in the story, it's cortisol. And the other chemical is called oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is related to the feeling of empathy. So when we see a character overcome that problem, our brain releases oxytocin. And that's related to a feeling of empathy. That's what that human connection is that comes from stories. So when you hear someone's story, whether they tell it to you verbally, whether you read it in a book or see it in a movie, you're quite literally experiencing what that person has experienced, right? In a scientific way, your brain is connecting with what they've gone through. And that I like to call the chemistry of love, because we're connecting as human beings in a way that causes us to love each other. And so I think Ben and I sort of realized that storytelling wasn't necessarily about getting published on the big scale, right? But we wanted to know, how can we help people accomplish this? How can we help human beings connect to each other? So we pivoted with what resources we had left, which weren't a lot, and we came up with this thing called the Dream Press. And what the Dream Press is a digital journaling platform. So the idea that you can journal from your phone and from your computer and save it all online. And once you've journaled for an extended period of time, you can click print, and it prints off your journal and sends it to you in the mail. And the reason that we feel like we're solving this problem of storytelling or helping people create more love in their life is because we're encouraging people to tell more stories, right? And not necessarily these huge narratives, but it's just the little things that happen in your life. So the way it works, you put in your phone number and you tell your prompt when you want it to text you and what you want it to say. And it will send you that text message at that time. So last night at 10:30 p.m., I got a text message, and I labeled the number in my phone journal, right? So my journal texts me at 10:30 p.m., says, "Hi, Mitch, tell me a story that happened today," right? And all I have to do is lean over, text a few lines or text a lot, add a photo, whatever I want to add in, click send, and it sends it and logs it in my journal. And then I can do that, and I can go in online and edit and add more photos or do whatever I want and sort of maintain it that way. We feel like this is really important because if we can increase the amount of stories that are told, we feel like we can increase the amount of love in the world. And so I would encourage all of you to look at your life and think of the stories you're telling. Are you recording the little moments that are important to you? Or are you sort of looking just to those big projects that move you through your creative career? I would challenge you, to capture the small moments in between. And if you've got nothing else from me, I think this quote sums it all up pretty well. And if Mr. Rogers says it, you know it's true. He said, "Frankly, there isn't anyone you couldn't learn to love once you've heard their story." Thanks.